little bit more on this notion of Shushan Purim, because Shushan Purim is actually a bit of a mysterious thing. The Megillah tells us, Megillah Esther tells us that Haman wanted to have the Jewish people destroyed on the 13th of Adar, and letters were sent out that on the 13th of Adar, the Goyim, mainly from Amalek it happened to be, can go ahead and destroy. They're given free license to destroy the Jewish people. But then a second letter was sent out that gave the Jewish people the right, v'napochu, in reverse, to kill their enemies. So we are told there was a great war on the 13th of Adar, in which the Jewish people were victorious. It mentions they killed 75,000 people, quite amazing, across the whole Persian Empire. And in Shushan, they killed 500 people. But then Esther, so they fought on the 13th, and they rested and celebrated on the 14th. That's what the Megillah says. Esther then said that there are still enemies in Shushan who would try to destroy us. Can we be given permission one extra day? So in Shushan, they fought on the 14th, and they rested on the 15th. So clearly the Megillah describes that throughout the whole Persian Empire, they fought on the 13th, and they rested on the 14th. In Shushan, they fought on the 13th and the 14th, and they rested on the 15th. Okay, that's what it says in terms of a fact. Then it says, therefore, all of the cities that are open without walls celebrate the 14th of Adar as a day of celebration. Now, the pasuk does not say what the walled cities did. Chazal have a drasha. Since the open cities celebrate on the 14th, the implication is that the walled cities celebrate on the 15th, and that's the origin of Shushan Purim. Now the question is, okay, that's the halacha, and we'll define when you have to have a wall, that's another thing. But what's the logic of this? Why would walled cities, in other words, the only difference that emerges from the Megillah is Shushan and everywhere else. Everywhere. The Jews fought on the 13th, they rested on the 14th. In Shushan, only in Shushan, they fought on the 13th and the 14th because Esther requested it, and they rested on the 15th. That's why the 15th is called Shushan Purim. And quite logically, therefore, the only city in the world that should observe Purim on the 15th is the city of Shushan, if there's any Jews there. Right? So, l'chaira, there is no self-evident logic why all walled cities would keep Purim on the 15th, right? You understand that? Because the whole Megillah doesn't make sense in that way, because it says they fought on the 13th, they rested on the 14th, Esther asked an extra day to fight our enemies. So in Shushan, they fought on the 14th, they rested on the 15th. Therefore, open cities rest on the 14th. Okay, that's fine. But why do walled cities rest on the 15th? Now, first of all, there's another general point that people love to make, just an important point, that Yidden do not celebrate on the day of our military victory. We celebrate on the day afterwards when we have peace, meaning we don't celebrate on the 13th when we killed our enemies. We celebrate on the 14th when we rested and had a matzav of shalom. That's a general question, but that still doesn't answer the Shushan Purim. So the truth of the matter is, this is a very hard kasha, a very difficult kasha, and this is asked by all the Rishonim in Maseches Megillah. What is the logic that Prazim, which are open cities, on the 14th, and Mukafin are on the 15th? So there are really three types of mahalchim that are given in answer to this question. The first is based on a Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says the institution of Shushan Purim is to give kavod to Eretz Yisrael. And that's the concept like this. Ideally, we should have had a double system. All over the world, everywhere, you keep Purim on the 14th, and in Shushan, you keep it on the 15th. That's what it should have been. But that would have meant that we're singling out Shushan to have its own holiday, which is a good reason. But in a sense, we don't want Shushan to be more important than the chashuv cities of Eretz Yisrael. So in order to give kavod to Eretz Yisrael, instead of giving Shushan the uniqueness of its own holiday, we want to give every comparable city in Eretz Yisrael the chashivas of Shushan. So therefore, we treat all the walled cities in Eretz Yisrael like Shushan. Now, the only problem is the following. All right, so that's step one. So step one is l'chavaid Eretz Yisrael. We want the cities in Eretz Yisrael to be given the chashivas of Shushan, to have a special Purim day on the 15th. Now, the problem is, though, that at the time of Megillas Esther, Eretz Yisrael was in a state of desolation. There were virtually no walled cities around. Yerushalayim didn't have a wall then. So they therefore had to say, well, if we want to give kavod to Eretz Yisrael based on any city that's chashuv like Shushan that has a wall, we can't base it on does it have a wall now, because no cities have a wall now. So we have to base it once had a wall, bimei Yehoshua ben Nun, and that is the rule, that even if a city did not have a wall now. So it's interesting. Shushan itself did not have a wall from the days of Yehoshua ben Nun. So Shushan keeps Shushan Purim because that was indeed the Purim of Shushan. And that doesn't even depend on whether it had a wall, bimei Yehoshua or not. But the rest of Eretz Yisrael, you want to honor Eretz Yisrael by making it equal in importance to Shushan, if it's a wall, the chashuv cities, the walled cities, but there were no walled cities in Eretz Yisrael at the time. Now, according to that lumdus, it should turn out that the only walled cities, bimei Yehoshua, that should have a Shushan Purim are only cities in Eretz Yisrael. Meaning, what if you had a walled city, or a city that had a wall, bimei Yehoshua ben Nun, that was in Chutz La'aretz? Would they keep Purim on the 14th or the 15th? Well, based on this Yerushalmi, that the whole takana of Shushan Purim, beyond Shushan, is to enhance the glory of Eretz Yisrael, then a Chutz La'aretz city should always do it on the 14th. Now, I think I indicated the other day that some say Prague has a wall going all the way back, bimei Yehoshua ben Nun, and some say Constantinople had a wall. There are a few different cities which some say had very, very ancient walls. But according to this cheshbon, they would still keep Purim on the 14th because the whole takana of Shushan Purim is lichavod Eretz Yisrael. Yeah.
Why should it be at the time of Yehoshua specifically and not at the time of Shlomo or something like that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Meaning, once, in other words, this only explains why you didn't look at it having a wall in the days of Achashverosh, because nothing had a wall. But if you go back to Shlomo, there probably were more cities that had walls, bimei Shlomo, than before. So on that, the Gemara does have a Gezerah Shava, which is a little mudna, because you're using a Gezerah Shava to define a rabbinic law of Shushan Purim. But the Gemara does make a Gezerah Shava legabe another halacha, because there's one mitzvah in the Torah. There is one mitzvah in the Torah that also depends on a wall. Nothing to do with Purim, absolutely nothing to do with Purim at all. And that's the din of Batei Arei Choma. What is the din of Batei Arei Choma? That if I sell you, at the time when there was Yovel, when I sell you a house that's inside of a walled city, I have 1 year to redeem it by giving you back your money. But if I don't redeem it within 12 months, it permanently becomes the buyer's, and it does not return to the seller in Yovel, meaning Batei Arei Choma is an exception to the Yovel rules. If I sell you a field, the field goes back to me when Yovel comes. Right? That's the halacha. If I sell you a house in an open city, same thing. But this is a Gezerah Sakosov, that if I sell you a house in an Ir Choma, you are given, not you, I am given 12 months to get it back, and you can't stop me. But if the 12 months passes, it is the buyer's permanently, and it's not Yotzei B'Yovel. And there, the Gemara has a halacha that because it says Asher Lo Choma, a city that has a wall, but the word lo, the kesiv, is Lamed Aleph, which means no, but the kari is Lamed Vav. Yes, it has. So the Gemara's drasha is the double entendre connotes that even if it had a wall, Bimei Yehoshua, and it didn't have a wall when at the time that you sold it, there would still be din of Batei Arichama. So the Gemara then makes a Gezerah Shava from Megillah, from Batei Arichama to Megillah. So that's reason number one. Reason number one is L'chavaid Eretz Yisrael. We want to make the more chashuv cities of Eretz Yisrael as distinct as Shushan. That Shushan shouldn't be the only one that gets its own Yom Tov. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, and the Ran brings this. Reason number two is said by the Ramban. The Ran brings this as well. And the Ramban says an interesting thing. The Ramban says that actually, remember what the Pasuk says. The Pasuk says, therefore, the Jews who live in open cities keep Purim on the 14th. And it actually says nothing in the text about the walled cities. So the Ramban actually says an interesting point. The first year of Purim, only the Jews, it's mamish pashut pshat in the pasuk, only the Jews in the open cities celebrated. The Jews in the walled cities didn't celebrate at all. Did not celebrate at all. In other words, year one. Now why is this? So here the Ramban has kind of a funny definition of a walled city. He says, the walled city meant walled cities which only had Jewish population. So the concept was this. If you lived in an open city, a Jewish city, then you would be afraid that the Goyim would come after you on the 14th. But the Mukafin were not afraid that Goyim would come after them because they were in a walled city. So they felt there was no reason to celebrate. In other words, the Ramban learns the Pasuk Kipshuto. Only the open cities celebrated the first Purim on the 14th. The Mukafin did not celebrate at all. So the Ramban says it was only the next year, because remember, the first Purim was a spontaneous celebration. It was not yet a decree. Purim became a holiday, an official holiday, only year two. Right? Mordechai sent letters. So year two, Mordechai basically said, it's not proper for you, Mukafin, to separate yourself from Am Yisrael, because you too were in danger. But in order to show, it's almost an insult, Shushan Purim is now an insult. In order to show that the Mukafin are Johnny-come-latelys, their holiday is a Johnny-come-lately, meaning to say, you're not going to celebrate the same time as the open cities. You will celebrate a day later. We're going to lump you together with Shushan. So the important point to keep in mind is the reason Shushan keeps Shushan Purim is not the reason Yerushalayim keeps Shushan Purim. It's almost a little bit of an insult. Shushan keeps Shushan Purim because the 15th of Adar was the day of their rest. Yerushalayim, or walled cities, keep Shushan Purim because they were negligent in not keeping the first Purim because they felt they were not B'sakana. Now, the emes is, though, you still need the Yerushalmi because if that would be the definition, we still should go with, did it have a wall in the days of Achashverosh, right? So in that we say, well, initially it was demotion, but then we want to be... We want to give, it's a strange thing. On one hand, it's a demotion, but then you want to give kavod by characterizing the Eretz Yisrael cities as mukafin, so you then go with Yoshua ben Nun. Again, in a way, you're moving in opposite directions, because the second day is a demotion, but since it's a demotion applicable to mukafin, you want to give the cities in Eretz Yisrael the chashivas of Mukafin, so you still need the kavod of Eretz Yisrael there. Okay, so these are two different reasons, meaning according to the first reason, both the Prazim and the Mukafin, year one, may have celebrated on the 14th. but Chazal decided that we want the cities of Eretz Yisrael to have the chashivas equal to Shushan, upgrade. According to the other, it's kind of a downgrade because the Mukafin Bichlal didn't celebrate year one. Of course, this assumes Mukafin meant only Jews were in the walled city, because obviously, if you're in a walled city with Persians, you're just as much in sakana as anybody else, if not more so. Yeah.
You think some of those Jewish walled cities were actually surrounded by an eruv?
Well, first of all, a walled city is usually an eruv in and of itself. You don't need a separate eruv. So that brings me to something I want to talk about again. The issue of wall. All right, so the bottom line, although, as they say, the actual origins of Shushan Purim are very murky. It's not at all clear what's going on, but the bottom line is very clear. Any city that had a wall, at least in Eretz Yisrael, from the time of Yeshua ben Nun, observes Purim on the 15th, right? The bottom line is very clear. Yerushalayim, we observe Purim on the 15th, right? And that's why an alternative name for Shushan Purim is Purim de Mukafin, Purim of the Mukafin. Now, the one city that we know had a wall, Bimei Yoshua ben Nun, is of course Yerushalayim. But there are a number of cities in which there is a suffix if it had a wall, Mimei Yoshua. And when you have a suffix, the halacha is you actually have to read Megillah and really observe Purim twice, on the 14th and the 15th. And according to some opinions, Tveria falls within this doubt. Tzfat falls within this doubt. Hebron falls within this doubt. And there are kehilos that will treat it as a doubt, and they'll observe Purim on the 14th and the 15th. Others say it's not a doubt, and they do it on the 14th, etc. But the issue I want to discuss very briefly is, Yerushalayim, we know for sure, had a wall, but not this part of Yerushalayim, right? You talk about Malot Dafna, Arzei Abira, Ramot, I mean, basically everything outside. Now, granted, the old city walls, okay, you have to be a little careful here. The old city walls are certainly not the walls that existed in the days of Yeshua ben Nun. The old city walls were built in the 1500s, in the 16th century, by Suleiman the Magnificent, one of the Ottoman rulers. So, if you want to be technically accurate, the reason why Yerushalayim reads on the 15th is not because of the walls of the old city, but it's because of the walls of Yeshua in the time of Yeshua ben Nun that are very much long gone. Now, in truth, the area that was encompassed by those walls may not even be the same. There's an overlap. There's 100% an overlap, but it may cover more, may cover less, etc., etc. So, whatever it is, though, for sure, when you're talking about here, even here, which is not far from the old city, we are absolutely not within the walled area. So the question is, why does Yerushalayim, outside of the old city walls, keep Megillah reading or keep Purim on the 15th? So the Gemara in Megillah explains that, yes, the Machayev of keeping Purim on the 15th is the existence of a wall Bimei Yoshua ben Nun. Very true. But once you have established that certain Makayim, there are various extensions of the city that will treat those extensions as part of the walled city, even though it's not in the wall. And the two categories are called Samuch, adjacent, and Nireh, visible. These are or, this is not an and. A Samuch or a Nireh. So I just want to go over the different questions about Samuch and Nireh and why there are still, to this very day, the possibility of machlokes about Ramot, when you observe Purim in Ramot, etc. Okay, so Samuch, in its simplest incantation, this is an automatic rule, is like a Techum. Any places that are within 2,000 amos of the area that had the wall are Nigrar Basor, the walled city. And if you live within 2,000 amos of the area that had a wall, even if there's no wall now, you would read Megillah and observe Purim on the 15th because you are within the Techum of the city. That is L'chula Yalma. Now, that alone is not going to help us here. We are more than 2,000 amos from the wall of Yerushalayim. So now, let's look at the laws of Techum Shabbos. And that's going to be the big machlokas. Do you apply the laws of Techum Shabbos to the din of Samuch of Mukafin? Now, Techum Shabbos also has a certain rule, that you're not allowed to walk more than 2,000 amos, that's around a kilometer, from the place where you began Shabbos. Now, that has nothing to do with the wall, but that's a din of Techum. But here is the thing. We know that as long as there's continuity of houses, the Techum does not start until you're past the last house. Now, what do I mean by continuity of houses? That has a definition. Continuity means, in Hilchos Eruvin, that between the houses you don't have a break of more than 70 amos, fraction. So let's assume, again, I'm not talking about Purim now, I'm talking about Techum Shabbos, and then we'll see how this might apply. Let's assume that I'm here, and I want to walk, I have to walk, 5 miles from my house to go to a hospital. So the Techum does not start when I leave my house. The Techum starts as long as there are houses within 70 amos of each other. The city keeps on going. At the point where I have more than 70 amos to the next house, my Techum starts at that house that I'm at, and I have 2,000 amos from there. Okay, in other words, that actually means, and at that point, by the way, even if the houses after that are within 70 amos, that's not going to help me. Once I start measuring my 2,000 amos, we measure our 2,000 amos, even if it's in the middle of a house, so to speak. You cannot go any further. Okay, you see how Techum works? Meaning to say, my Techum does not begin until I have a break of 70 amos to the next house. It's a little more 70 amos and a fraction. Once you have that break, you got to start your 2,000 amos from the last house, and that's going to end whenever it ends. Now that is how it works for Techum Shabbos. So now, there's a huge machlokas rishonim. Do you apply that type of reasoning legabe the definition of a walled city? Meaning to say, in the wall, and of course I don't mean it has a wall now, but in an area, a shetach that had a wall in the days of Yoshua ben Nun. Okay? So I clearly have 2,000 amos from that city to read on Tesvav. That's for sure. But the question is, do I get the benefit of continuity of houses in which I don't measure my 2,000 amos till the last house? Or am I mechuyev to always measure my 2,000 amos from the walled area? Now, you understand how this is going to be a huge nafkamina, even regarding this neighborhood. Because if you take the position that the din of samuch, adjacency, requires that the shetach be located within 2,000 amos of the walled area, even if there's continuity of houses, then we're outside of that 2,000 amos. Even though it's not outside of the 2,000 amos for Techum Shabbos, but it is more than 2,000 amos from the walled city, you would read Biyud Dalet. If, on the other hand, we apply the rule that the Techum does not start until you have a break of 70 amos, then B'chiyai Gavna, the Techum would keep on going. In other words, I wouldn't even start my Techum yet, because we have the continuity of houses. So because of this, there were many machloksim. It turns out, lamaisa, lahalacha, we seem to paskin that you apply the same rules for samuch, for a mukaf chayma, that you apply for Techum Shabbos, and therefore, as long as there's not a break of 70 amos, you still have, the Techum doesn't even, you have 2,000 amos from the point that you have a break of 70 amos. But that is why you should know, in the early years of Ramot, I don't remember the exact dates, but in the early years of Ramot was built up, but there was a lot of vacant ground. And it turned out that the early years of Ramot, it was up Kapaskin, they would read Megillah on the 14th. Then the neighborhoods got built up, so they read Megillah on the 15th. You see, now you understand the issue here, because the Techum got extended with the houses. Now, there's another svara too, which is very amazing, that some Shitas say, even forgetting Techum, any area that's in a common Erev is treated as united. So that makes life very, very simple if you follow that view. And that is, if there is a tzuras HaPesach, if there's a wire, a symbolic enclosure that unites the walled area of Yeshua ben Nun with the non-walled area, any area that shares a common Erev would follow the halacha of the mukaf and read on the 15th. Interesting question is, what if you don't rely on that Erev for Hilchos Shabbos? Can you rely on that Erev for Hilchos Purim? Shabbos, I don't want to carry on Shabbos, but maybe I could still consider it a kosher Erev, legabe the heter of reading it on the 15th, right? So now all of this is the issue of what is called samuch, what is called adjacent. So clearly something is adjacent if it's within 2,000 amos of the wall. That's for sure. That's not a machlokas at all. Some say adjacent would include 2,000 amos from the last house in which there's not a break of 70 amos, which is essentially what we do today. And a third view would even be more makel and say that even if you had a lot of vacant land between here and Ramot, if there is a unified Erev, that would be enough to consider it adjacent. Now that is called samuch. Now, remember, there's an alternative criterion that's called nira. Now nira is a totally different rule. Nira basically means any area that can see the walled area. Even if it's, let's assume you're on a mountain. Let's assume that you're more than 2,000 amos away from the wall. But you can see, actually, it's question, everything's in my clothes. What do you have to see? But the question is, if you can, some say you have to see the ground, not just the wall. But if you can see the ground, then that area would be on the 15th. Now again, it goes this way. It's not what you can see from the walled area. It's what you can see from the non-walled area, meaning an area that can see the mukaf is shayach to the mukaf. So you're looking at it from the perspective of the shetach that's not with the wall. Again, machloksim, you see the wall, see the ground, see the houses, see the roofs. many technicalities legabe what is a nira. But for our purposes, just be aware that we have these two different rules. We have a rule of samuch, and we have a rule of nira, and these are ways that the parameters of the walled city get extended in terms of tesvav. And again, if you read, you'd be very, very surprised. Well, I guess you wouldn't be surprised now that you know the background. But kama v'kama Jews. Remember that until the latter part of the 19th century, or maybe the mid-19th century, there virtually were no settlements adjacent to Yerushalayim outside of the walls of the old city. Yidden lived in the old city. They lived in the Jewish quarter. They lived in all the quarters, actually. But there was nothing outside. And people were afraid. They didn't want to be outside. There were Arabs that could attack them. There were wild animals, etc. And it was very crowded. The conditions, the Jewish quarter then did not look like the Jewish quarter now. It was very crowded. People were dying of disease and polluted water. So the great philanthropist, Moshe Montefiore, started building settlements outside of the old city wall. Yamin Moshe, named after him, Yamin Moshe, with the windmill and the like, and he offered money to people to live outside of the old city walls. And people were so afraid that they basically, they lived there during the day and they went back to the old city at night. They didn't want to be there at night. And then later, Mea Sharim, which at one point was a very fashionable, high class. Now it's in Ruchnias, maybe high class, but it was actually Gashmias. Pictures of Mea Sharim in the 1920s. It was like Paris. They had all these fancy fashions they were selling in Mea Sharim, and like it was the place to go. And Yamin Moshe, Kiryat Moshe, all the Moshe, by all the neighborhoods in Yerushalayim that are named Moshe is after Moshe Montefiore. He's the one who paid for all of these neighborhoods. So you have to know that this really started in earnest only in like the 1880s, 1890s, early 1900s even. Nachal HaShiva is another example. And there was an immediate question: when do we read Megillah? When do we keep Purim? And the tshuvas are very, very complicated because at that point there were these neighborhoods, but there was plenty of vacant ground between that and the wall, etc. And the question is, how do you compute the Techum? Right? So there are many, many shilas tshuvas, but today, because everything is built up, so the shilas are maybe a little less complicated than they were in the 1800s. But even then it's a machlokas, because some Rishonim took the position that you measure the Techum from the walled area, not from the houses. So as a result, the houses within 2,000 amas are going to be nichlal, but the houses beyond the 2,000 amas, even though you have an unbroken shed, less than 70 amos, that's not going to help you. So there too, you'd have a big machlokas, but it seems that we don't follow that. That's why. Otherwise we wouldn't read Megillah here on the 15th. And I'm sure, I don't know for sure, but I tell you, you'd be surprised. There are people who are super machmer on this, meaning in virtually every community in Yerushalayim, there are yechidim who will read Megillah on the 14th, precisely, as well as the 15th, precisely because of these shilas. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, in the back, yeah.
What is the suffix? What day you do the bracha on? Do you make it on both?
Yeah, so if it's a suffix, you make the bracha on the 14th. But if it's only a suffix because of a chumrah, meaning most poskim would say the 15th, and you're doing it the 14th l'chumrah, then you would make the bracha on the 15th. So if it's a 50-50 suffix, you make it on the 14th. Yeah.
It may not apply as much here, but in places where houses have like acres of land, would those acres count as part of the 70 alma?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that's very nogeya, not just Purim. This is nogeya to Chum Shabbos. I'm walking along, and there are houses that are situated on big lots. So the question is, do I have to start my Techum because the lot is bigger than 70 amos? 70 amos is only 140 feet. It's not a huge amount. So once again, that is a machlokus. Many say you do not count yards, you only count houses. So if the lot is bigger than 70, you got to start your Techum measurement. Like now, which could actually freeze you in the middle of a city. So the statement, see, understand this actually means the statement that we commonly say is not always technically true. We always say you can walk the duration of the city. Not necessarily, because if you have big lots, your Techum might end in the middle of a city, right, depending on that. So it's not always true that you have the whole city to establish your Techum. Yeah.
What did people do the year after Purim? I mean, it's probably changed a lot since then. Like, either you were in the city with the walls or not, and then you would celebrate accordingly. I would imagine they didn't have all these conditions.
Well, I don't know if the setup was that way. Samach Venera, I'm not sure when that entered the halachic system, but certainly by year 2, walled cities were 15, and open cities were 14. Did they apply the rule of Techum? I don't know. It could be that they did. I'm not sure. I don't have any raya that they didn't. They didn't have all the modern complications. But the rule that the Tuchum of a city is considered part of the city, that I assume they kept. There's no reason why that would be a
Why
Chiddush.
did we bring in the Samach Venira?
No, Chazal give us the halacha of Samach V'nira, but you're asking me, did they have the din of Samach V'nira the second Purim?
I guess.
It could be that they did. I don't have a raya that they didn't. Why the Gemara said it? Because we have to know it. Otherwise, we wouldn't know it. But it doesn't mean the Amoraim are Machadish it. This could have been something they had all the way back.
And also, is there a significance to the 4 holy cities being the ones that have this?
Well, yeah, right. We know it's makubal that there are 4 holy cities, especially holy cities in Eretz Yisrael: Yerushalayim, Tzvat, Tiberia, and Hebron. They are connected, by the way, the 4 elements of nature. Yerushalayim is the city of fire, and Hebron, which is the cemetery grounds of the Avos, is the city of Ophor, and Tiberia on Yam Kinneret is the Yesod Hamayim, and Tzvat, which is mystical and ethereal, is air, ruach, right? So the 4 cities are connected the 4 Yesodais, which in turn are connected the 4 letters of the Shem Havaya. But the idea is that these are very ancient cities. Like, a lot of towns in Israel are pretty recent, and the ancient cities had walls. It's simply connected to that idea. Now, Tiberia, the Gemara says, is a suffix because Tiberia is on the Yam Kinneret, so it only had 3 walls, meaning the side that was fronting the water did not have a wall, but the Gemara has it said that the water is a natural protection against invasion. It's hard to, you have to, and therefore the water might be considered a wall in that way. Yeah.
What if they put a boon, like protect the water, like a wall that's like in the water?
Yeah, well, that for sure. Yeah, that would certainly be a wall. Yeah, it depends how high it is.
Imagine it was like usually they're not very high off the water. I think they're basically below the water, on the water.
Oh, so the point would just be that it would block an invasion. You mean Yeah, so that would be the reason why the water would be considered a barrier, because because water without anything is not much of a barrier. You just have a navy come and invade. But if they have something under the water level, that would block it. Now, the next thing, I guess maybe I'll say for tomorrow, that I want to discuss is, so issue number 1 is Samach V'nira. Okay, very important issue. But again, it's not something you have to paskin like, because everything was paskin for you already. The second issue is something that is very, very nogea you as individuals. Yerushalayim, right? The whole world keeps Purim on the 14th of Adar. Yerushalayim, we keep Purim on the 15th of Adar. But everybody likes to party as much as they can. So people like to go outside of Yerushalayim on the 14th and come back to Yerushalayim on the 15th. That way we get Purim everywhere. Of course, even in Yerushalayim, the 14th is very festive, so you don't really have to leave to have a simcha. But whatever, people like to go where it is. So here you have to understand that there are potentially massive complications regarding where you have to hear Megillah, how many times do you have to hear Megillah. There are actually configurations where a person might be patur legamri from hearing Megillah any day. Right? So there's actually a situation where you're not chayav to hear Megillah. Wow. I shouldn't say this. Best of both worlds. You get to get drunk and you don't even have to hear Megillah. Chas v'shalom, we should have that attitude, but maybe sometimes it's in somebody's head. So there are situations where you're patur mikan, and then there are situations where you're chayav to hear the Megillah and observe Shalach Manos and Matanos Le'Evyonim and Suda mikan. Right. So what we're talking about tomorrow is, when are you theoretically patur legamri? When are you chayav both days? And when do we say you're chayav in one day and not the other? And how will that work when you are a traveler that is commuting? The yesod, I'll just introduce one aspect of this yesod. The yesod of the Chiyuv Megillah is very, very different than, let's say, the obligation of keeping the second day of a Yom Tov. The second day of a Yom Tov for tourists depends on your place of origin and where you intend to go later. Megillah literally depends on where you are at a certain time of day. In other words, we don't have the attitude that because I'm from Yerushalayim, I have to hear Megillah on the 15th. Rather, I have to be in Yerushalayim at a certain time to have that chiyuv. And if I'm not in Yerushalayim at that particular time, I will be governed by the other rule. And the same thing with Bnei Brak. Bnei Brak reads Megillah on the 14th. Just because I live in Bnei Brak, that does not mean I got to hear Megillah on the 14th. I have to be in Bnei Brak at a certain time in order to be chayav, right? So it's very important that you time your trips in order to know what your chayav is. And the Mr. Shem, we'll talk about that issue tomorrow. Okay,